I never thought that after decades of public service, my retirement would be disturbed by something as petty and as dangerous as an HOA president. After 50 years in my beloved Victorian house, it wasn't politics or scandal that threatened my home. It was a neighbor with a tape measure and a hidden agenda. It began one Sunday morning. I was barely awake after a late-night budget meeting at the governor's office. The knock on the front door was sharp, insistent. Dragging myself up, I opened it to find Barbara Wilson standing there, tapping her foot in agitation, her measuring tape hung from one hand, a manila folder from the other. "Governor Williams," she said, voice clipped, "your roses are 3 inches taller than regulation height." Behind her, my wife Sarah's rose garden stretched proudly across the lawn. Sarah had tended those blooms every morning for nearly 5 decades until cancer stole her away. Keeping her roses alive was the last promise I had made to her. Seeing them treated like a crime scene ignited a quiet anger deep inside me. "Barbara," I said, steady as a stone, "those roses were here long before this HOA ever existed." She merely smirked, pushing her designer sunglasses higher onto her nose, and shoved a notice into my hand. "New bylaws, passed last month. You would know if you attended meetings. Being governor doesn't make you special here." I watched her march across the lawn, measuring tape swinging like a weapon, moving on to harass Tom Patterson about the color of his mailbox. I folded the violation notice carefully and placed it in my jacket pocket, but something inside me shifted that morning. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about roses. It was about power, control, and something far more sinister than enforcing community standards. Later that afternoon, while sorting through my mail, I found a letter addressed simply to current resident. Inside was a shocking eviction notice claiming I had 30 days to vacate my home. My hands trembled as I reread the document. There had to be a mistake. I owned my home free and clear. Before panic could take hold, I picked up the phone and called Tom. He answered on the first ring. "John, thank God you called," he said urgently. "Your house, it's listed for sale online. I just saw it. Zillow. Posted this morning." A pit opened in my stomach. That was impossible. I hadn't listed anything. "Who's the agent?" I asked, though I already had a sinking feeling. "Wilson Real Estate Group," Tom said grimly. "Barbara Wilson." The pieces clicked together with terrifying speed. The harassment, the sudden bylaw changes, the eviction notice. It wasn't random, it was orchestrated. As the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows over Sarah's rose garden, I realized that the fight was no longer just about property lines or garden regulations. It was about protecting the life Sarah and I had built, about defending the promises we made, and about standing up for the very principle of home itself. And if Barbara Wilson thought she could bulldoze 50 years of memories without a fight, she was about to learn exactly who she was dealing with. I tore through my home office like a man possessed, searching every drawer, every dusty filing cabinet Sarah and I had ever stuffed with records. My hands, once steady through a lifetime of political battles, now trembled with urgency. Somewhere in this house, I had to find proof. Proof that I owned my home beyond any doubt. Finally, buried deep within Sarah's old cedar filing chest, I found it. The original deed to the house, still sealed in the protective sleeve she insisted on using decades ago. Relief surged through me, but something else slipped out from behind the papers. A folded, yellowed letter I'd never seen before. My breath caught as I opened it. "My dearest John," Sarah's familiar handwriting flowed across the page. "If you're reading this, something has gone wrong. Check beneath the third bush from the left in my rose garden. I buried a waterproof box there with copies of everything important. You always teased me about being too cautious. Maybe you'll thank me someday." Tears blurred my vision. Even in death, Sarah was still watching over us. Without hesitation, I grabbed a shovel and headed straight for the garden, still dressed in yesterday's rumpled suit. The morning's violations and threats didn't matter now. Only Sarah's voice guided me. The earth gave easily under my hands, rich and damp. As I dug, snippets of conversation floated from Barbara's porch next door. She was on the phone, her sharp voice slicing through the early evening air. "Of course it's legal," she was saying. "The digital transition mixed up the records. We're just fixing them. By the time anyone notices, the sales will be finalized." Her words hardened my resolve. Then, with a heavy metallic thunk, my shovel struck something solid. My heart pounded as I unearthed a weathered metal box, exactly where Sarah said it would be. Inside were the treasures that could save our home: certified property surveys, a copy of our original deed, and every HOA document ever signed, including an important exemption clause from 1990, specifically protecting pre-existing gardens like ours. I looked up across the garden. Barbara had stopped talking. She stood frozen on her porch, eyes locked onto the box in my hands. For the first time since this battle had started, I saw fear flicker across her face. Without a word, she turned on her heel and rushed inside, already dialing another number. The sun slipped lower behind the house Sarah and I had loved for 5 decades, casting long golden beams through her precious roses. I stood there holding the evidence close, realizing the full weight of what I had just uncovered. This wasn't just about saving one home. It was about unmasking an entire scheme that could topple everything Barbara had so carefully built. And with Sarah's quiet wisdom guiding me from beyond the grave, I intended to see it through to the end. I didn't sleep that night. After finding the buried box, my mind spun with questions, anger tightening like a vice in my chest. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, I realized I couldn't just fight for my home. I needed to expose exactly how deep this rot had spread. Down in my basement, among dusty shelves and memories of a simpler life, I pulled out another metal box Sarah and I had bought when we first moved in. Inside, preserved by years of careful hands, were the original deed from 1974, stacks of paid property tax receipts, and every legal record tied to our home. Proof. But as I leafed through them, a noise outside caught my ear, car doors slamming. I hurried upstairs and peered through the window. Parked directly in front of my house was a sleek car with a real estate logo plastered across the side. I opened the front door just in time to catch the agent stepping onto my porch. "Good morning. We're here to prepare for the open house this weekend," she chirped, oblivious to the horror freezing my veins. She showed me a tablet. On it was a real estate listing. My home, $850,000, available immediately. "I never listed my home for sale," I said, my voice low but firm, the old governor's edge slipping back into my tone. The agent's smile faltered. She fumbled through her files, muttering something about HOA authorization. I didn't wait for an explanation. I called James Martinez, an old friend still working at the county records office. If anyone could uncover what was happening, it was James. While James dug through official records, my neighbor Tom rushed over with his laptop. Together, we hacked our way through the new online HOA system. It didn't take long to find it. There it was, in black and white, a record claiming I had transferred ownership of my property to the Valley Creek HOA during the digital transition. But I had never signed a single document. Tom's fingers flew across the keyboard, his face growing paler with every click. "Look at this," he muttered, pointing. 5 other houses, 5 families who had lived here for decades, all listed as HOA property now. My phone rang. James was on the other end, his voice tense. "Governor, something's very wrong," he said. "The digital signature for your deed transfer, it's dated 3 months ago. But I'm looking at footage from that exact day. You were giving a keynote speech at the Capitol. You couldn't have signed anything." My blood ran cold. It wasn't just sloppy paperwork. It was deliberate, calculated. As if summoned by the unfolding disaster, my security team called next. They had just confronted a man taking measurements outside my home. He claimed to be preparing for HOA-mandated renovations I had never approved. I scribbled notes, my old campaign instincts kicking in. This wasn't negligence. This was a hostile takeover, disguised as community standards. Yeah, Barbara's harassment about my roses, the sudden rule changes, the fabricated property transfers, it all formed one massive, interconnected web. Then another blow, an email from Barbara herself landed in my inbox, smug and dripping with false civility. Reminder, HOA maintains full authority over community standards. Buyers touring this weekend appreciate our commitment to neighborhood excellence, unlike some current residents. I stared at the screen, every muscle in my body coiling tight. This wasn't just theft, it was warfare, and Barbara was counting on us, on me, to be too tired, too grief-stricken, too distracted to fight back. She didn't realize yet that she wasn't just battling a homeowner clinging to memories. She was picking a fight with a governor who had weathered far greater storms and never lost. The emergency HOA meeting was called so fast it set the whole neighborhood buzzing. People whispered in driveways and leaned over fences, passing rumors like wildfire. It was the kind of hastily organized gathering that smelled of desperation, not authority. I didn't bother with my usual suit and tie that afternoon. Instead, I wore my gardening clothes, faded jeans, dirt still clinging to my knees from tending Sarah's roses earlier that morning. Let Barbara see me as she wished, just an old man covered in mud. I knew better. I came armed, not with appearances, but with truth. The community center buzzed with uneasy energy. Every seat was filled. Neighbors I'd known for decades, some curious, others clearly worried, turned to watch as I walked down the aisle, briefcase in hand. Inside it was every critical document, the original deed, tax receipts, the buried exemption letter, and the HOA's own founding agreements, untouched and unbroken across 50 years. Tom Patterson squeezed my shoulder as I sat beside him, his face grim but determined. This wasn't just about my house anymore, it was about everyone's. Barbara strutted to the podium in a blazing red blazer, tapping manicured nails against the wood, smiling that plastic smile she'd perfected through years of community manipulation. "Governor Williams," she said, rolling my title across her tongue like it was something filthy. "I assume you're here regarding the property situation." "I am," I answered, keeping my voice level, steady. Sarah had taught me long ago, never let them see you rattle. Barbara produced a thick stack of papers from her designer bag, holding them high. "According to our updated digital records, ownership of your home reverted to the HOA last year during our system transition. I'm afraid you no longer have a legal claim." There was a brief silence, a heartbeat where her smugness hung thick in the air. I stood slowly, knees creaking, letting the moment stretch. "Barbara," I said, setting my worn briefcase on the table with a soft thud. "I have lived in that home for 50 years. I have every deed, every record, every tax receipt since 1973 right here. You cannot rewrite history by typing a few lines into a computer." Murmurs rippled through the room. Mrs. Rodriguez from across the street stood up, voice shaking with outrage. "He's lived there longer than the HOA even existed." Barbara's fake smile tightened. She banged her gavel hard enough to echo through the hall. "The rules are the rules," she barked. "Failure to re-register during the system update results in forfeiture under Section 47B of the new bylaws." I smiled then, the kind of slow, deliberate smile that belongs only to men who know they have the winning hand. "Funny you should mention the new bylaws," I said. From my briefcase, I pulled the original HOA agreement, the real one signed in 1980, and held it high for the room to see. "It requires a 75% homeowner vote to approve any major bylaw change. According to the county records," I laid out the papers one by one. "No such vote ever took place." Barbara's hands started shaking. Her face paled, her composure cracking before our eyes. James Martinez, my old friend and the state attorney, rose from the back of the room. "I'd love to hear," he said loudly, "how a digital transition can overwrite 50 years of legally binding property rights." Barbara stumbled over her words, flipping through her papers desperately. The transition supersedes the old records," she shouted. "No," James said sharply. "It doesn't. Not in this state, not under federal law, and certainly not in this neighborhood." Barbara slammed her gavel again, but in her rush, papers spilled from her handbag, fluttering to the floor. Tom scooped one up and froze. "This," he said loudly, holding it up, "is a sale contract for John's house. Signed 3 months ago." The room exploded. Neighbors rose to their feet, shouting, demanding answers. Barbara tried to backpedal, phone in hand, furiously texting someone, but it was too late. Police officers, summoned by James and my security team earlier that day, were already waiting in the lobby. As Barbara made a frantic lunge toward the exit, papers still slipping from her designer bag, I stepped forward and delivered the final blow. "I think you should know," I said calmly. "This morning, I signed an executive order creating a state task force on housing fraud." Her head snapped toward me, panic flashing across her face. "And guess who's leading it?" I finished. She bolted for the door, but the officers were faster. They intercepted her just steps from freedom. As Barbara Wilson was led away in handcuffs, her neighbors, the people she had bullied and deceived, rose to their feet, not in chaos, but in unison. Tom picked up the fallen gavel and, without waiting for permission, declared, "I move for an immediate vote to remove Barbara Wilson as HOA president." Every hand in the room shot into the air, but deep down, I knew the fight wasn't over yet. Barbara's empire was larger than just our street, and tonight's victory was only the first step toward dismantling the whole rotten machine. The night after Barbara's arrest, I sat alone in my study, the heavy curtains drawn tight against the world outside. The room was filled with papers, recordings, and sworn affidavits, a growing mountain of evidence against her. Yet something gnawed at me, the way Barbara had so confidently manipulated so many pieces at once, the sheer scale of her arrogance. It didn't feel like the scheme of a lone woman. It felt bigger. Much bigger. A soft knock at my door pulled me from my thoughts. Linda Thompson, the HOA secretary, stepped inside, clutching a trembling USB drive in her hand. Her face was pale, her shoulders hunched with guilt and fear. "I can't sleep at night anymore," she whispered, closing the door behind her. "I should have come forward sooner." I called for my security team to sweep the drive for any threats, and when it came back clean, I plugged it into my laptop. What unfolded across my screen made my blood run cold. Meticulously organized spreadsheets, forged property records, fake transfer documents, and an organized network linking real estate agents, notaries, contractors, and even officials inside the county records office. Barbara hadn't just targeted my home. She had spent years systematically stealing houses across the entire county, preying on the vulnerable, the elderly, the busy, the grieving, the absent. Linda stood stiffly beside me as my neighbor Tom arrived with his daughter Sarah, a sharp-eyed data analyst who had been quietly suspicious of our neighborhood's property records for months. "Look at this pattern," Sarah said, typing rapidly on her laptop. Every mistake, every forged transfer targeted someone who was easy to steamroll, someone too distracted to fight back. On the screen, a sickening list of future targets appeared, 30 more homes in our community alone. Next to my name was a chilling note: "Too busy with state duties, wife deceased, emotionally attached to property equals unlikely to contest paperwork." They had profiled us like predators studying prey. The air in the room grew heavy as Linda revealed more. Secret recordings of Barbara discussing clearing out certain residents, emails plotting which houses to seize next, financial reports showing profits funneled through shell real estate companies into offshore accounts. Tom paced back and forth, his fists clenched tight. "Remember the Andersons?" he growled. 40 years they lived here, and Barbara forced them out over a stupid fence violation. It wasn't coincidence. It was strategy. And the deeper we dug, the more monstrous it became. Barbara's influence extended beyond our HOA board. She had tentacles in county offices, bank branches, renovation crews, even appraisal companies. Everyone who could make a fraudulent sale look legitimate had a price, and Barbara had paid it. "We have enough to bury her," Linda said fiercely, her voice shaking but strong. "Every email, every fake document, every bribe." I looked around at the faces in the room. People who had once trusted the system now staring into the heart of its corruption. No one said it aloud, but we all understood this wasn't about my house anymore. This was about saving an entire community and stopping a cancer that had already spread far beyond our little street. Barbara Wilson thought she could hide behind paperwork and procedure. She thought old men planting roses and secretaries filing minutes would never rise up. But she forgot something vital. Power built on deceit crumbles the moment truth steps into the light, and we had everything we needed to bring the whole rotten empire crashing down. The next 24 hours felt like standing inside a hurricane. The evidence we had gathered was explosive, but Barbara wasn't the kind of opponent to go quietly. It began just after sunset, when Tom called, his voice sharp with panic. "They're here, with bulldozers." I dropped the paperwork I was reviewing and rushed to the window. Lumbering up our quiet street under cover of night were 3 massive yellow machines, headlights glaring like beasts in the dark. Behind them, a handful of workers in reflective vests milled about, waving papers that looked suspiciously like official permits. I was already dialing the police as I grabbed my laptop and flipped open my security system's live feed. I started recording, broadcasting the entire scene in real time. If Barbara wanted to play dirty, then the whole world would see it. By the time the police arrived, silent lights flashing against the blackened sky, I was waiting at the gate, my original deed in one hand and my live-streaming phone in the other. Officer Rodriguez, who had grown up 2 streets over, approached the workers calmly, inspecting their paperwork. He didn't even try to hide his smirk when he spotted the glaring error. "This permit is dated for next week," he said, holding it up so the camera could catch it too. "You're early and unauthorized." The workers fidgeted and muttered, but the machines rumbled back into reverse, retreating down the street as fast as they had come. I thought perhaps, finally, that the worst was over. I was wrong. The next morning, before the sun had even crested the horizon, I caught movement by Sarah's memorial bench, the one she used to sit on, reading stories to our grandchildren. Barbara was there, alone. Phone pressed to her ear, papers in hand, she glanced furtively around before quickly disappearing into the dawn. When I stepped outside minutes later, the sight that met me nearly brought me to my knees. The bench was destroyed, splintered marble scattered across the lawn. The bronze plaque with Sarah's favorite quote about roses had been torn off, the lettering scratched into oblivion. Tom came sprinting over, his phone held high, already recording. Linda, breathless and red-eyed, joined us seconds later, clutching her own phone. "I got it," she gasped. "She did it herself." Her security footage captured Barbara's every movement, breaking the bench, scratching the plaque, laughing as she tossed the pieces across the garden. But behind her, barely visible in the footage, stood a familiar figure. The same real estate developer who had been trying to buy up our block for years. They weren't just trying to scare me. They were targeting everything that made this home sacred. We found 3 more hidden cameras around my property that day, installed behind hedges and disguised inside sprinkler heads, all linking back to a private server hidden behind anonymous IP addresses. Barbara hadn't just been harassing me, she had been studying me, learning my routines, my vulnerabilities, waiting for the right moment to strike, but she had miscalculated. She didn't know about the hidden camera tucked inside Sarah's old birdhouse, the one I had never removed, the one that quietly recorded everything. She didn't know about the GPS tracker my security team had slipped onto her car weeks ago, and she certainly didn't realize that her phone had been connecting automatically to my guest Wi-Fi, logging every one of her unauthorized visits. As I picked up the shattered pieces of Sarah's bench, something shifted inside me. The sorrow that had weighed on me for so long burned away, replaced by a fierce, unshakable resolve. Barbara had just handed me the smoking gun I needed, the proof that she wasn't just committing fraud. She was impersonating state officials by using the state seal illegally on fake eviction notices. She had escalated beyond mere real estate theft into felony territory. That evening, as the sunset bathed my battered garden in warm gold, my phone buzzed with another security alert. I watched from the window as Barbara returned, but this time she wasn't alone. A line of dark-suited figures accompanied her, faces grim, clipboards in hand, but lining the other side of the street, almost invisible until you looked closely, were unmarked police vehicles and state troopers, stationed and waiting. Barbara spotted them instantly, her face twisted into a mask of fear and fury. She had realized too late that she wasn't the hunter anymore. She was the prey. The sirens came at dawn, sharp and unrelenting, slicing through the quiet Sunday morning like a knife. I stood on my porch, coffee steaming in my hands, as 3 black and white state police cruisers rolled to a stop across the street. Doors swung open. Officers in crisp uniforms fanned out, efficient and merciless. Barbara's front door burst open before they could even knock. There she stood, still wrapped in designer pajamas, pearls gleaming stubbornly at her throat, as if clinging to the last shreds of control. "This is ridiculous," she screeched, mascara already smudging as tears welled. "Do you know who I am? I have powerful friends. I'm connected to Senator Parker." The officers didn't flinch. Senator Parker, after all, had lost his seat last year in a corruption scandal that smelled suspiciously familiar. Neighbors spilled out onto their lawns, still in bathrobes and slippers, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Johnson from number 42 clutched her phone, filming everything with shaking hands, the same Mrs. Johnson Barbara had once fined for installing a wheelchair ramp for her husband. Agent Rodriguez, leading the charge, approached me with a thick folder under his arm. "Governor," he said, his voice grim, "you were just the tip of the iceberg." He handed me the folder. Inside were reports stretching across 3 counties, 17 neighborhoods, over 40 homes, all following the same pattern. Digital property records mysteriously altered, quick, silent evictions, fraudulent sales funneled through Barbara's real estate shell companies. Barbara wasn't just a local menace. She was the architect of the largest housing fraud scheme our state had ever seen. Across the street, Barbara's hands were cuffed behind her back. The pearl necklace sagged as she shouted for the gathering crowd to listen. "He's framing me!" she screamed, jerking her head toward me. "This is a political attack. He's scared of me exposing him." I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. 20 years in public service had taught me that the truth needs no shouting match to win. It simply stands. More police cars arrived, heading toward her downtown real estate office. State investigators moved quickly, seizing boxes of documents, servers, even personal electronics. Linda arrived carrying 2 heavy boxes stuffed with HOA records, the real ones. Tom and Sarah trailed behind, arms full of evidence meticulously gathered over months. The files contained fake meeting minutes, altered votes, fake signatures, and financial statements tracing millions of dollars through offshore accounts. As Barbara was loaded into the back of a cruiser, her hair whipping wildly in the morning breeze, she tried one last desperate plea. "You'll regret this," she shouted. "You're ruining an innocent woman." But no one believed her. Not the officers, not the neighbors, not the journalists now arriving in droves, microphones ready to catch her every faltering word. The news spread like wildfire. By noon, headlines blared across every channel. State governor exposes largest HOA fraud in state history. Local HOA president arrested in multi-million-dollar scam. Community rallies as corruption falls. One by one, families who had been forced out by Barbara's schemes started to come back. Some stood crying on sidewalks they thought they'd never see again. Others simply knelt in their overgrown yards, pressing hands into the earth like it was sacred ground returned. As for me, I stayed on my porch, sipping my coffee, watching justice unfold. I thought about Sarah's roses, the shattered bench, the endless late nights spent reviewing old paperwork. I thought about every neighbor who had felt powerless, isolated, afraid. Today we proved that no one, no matter how rich, how connected, how ruthless, was above the law. And Barbara Wilson? She had finally learned the price of underestimating a man with nothing left to lose, and a community that remembered how to fight back. The morning after Barbara's arrest, our neighborhood woke to a stillness we hadn't felt in years. No angry letters taped to doors, no threat notices tucked under windshield wipers, no suspicious figures snapping photos from dark SUVs. Just the soft sound of birdsong weaving through the warm air and the quiet murmur of neighbors beginning to step, cautiously, back into the light. For the first time in months, I put on my old work gloves and went out to Sarah's garden, not to defend it, but to tend it, as she would have wanted. Kneeling in the dirt, I planted a new rose bush, a Sarah's love, bred for resilience and grace. My hands were slower now, less sure than the man who first tilled this soil 5 decades ago, but as I pressed the roots into the earth, I felt something take hold, something deeper than anger, deeper than grief. Hope. Tom wandered over with 2 steaming cups of coffee, wearing a smile I hadn't seen in a long time. "You know," he said, handing me a cup. "I never thought I'd see the day when this street felt like home again." I smiled back, brushing dirt from my knees. "Home's not just walls and fences," I said. "It's the people willing to fight for it." Linda arrived soon after, carrying a thick folder under one arm. As the newly elected HOA president, she had been working day and night to undo the damage Barbara left behind. "We drafted a new set of HOA bylaws," she said, spreading the papers out on the fresh wood of Sarah's rebuilt bench. They were beautiful in their simplicity, full digital transparency. Triple verification on any property record changes. Mandatory homeowner votes for all major decisions. Immediate expulsion for any board member found engaging in fraud. At the top of the document, in bold letters, was a new rule, written in honor of the fight we had waged. The Williams Rule. I traced my fingers over the words, feeling Sarah's spirit all around me. She would have laughed, thrown her head back, and teased me for taking life too seriously. Then she would have planted 3 more rose bushes before dinner. The neighborhood slowly came alive over the next few weeks. Families returned to their homes, reclaiming what had been stolen. Children's laughter once again echoed through backyards. Old neighbors who had stopped speaking under the weight of fear now shared barbecues and garden tools. We weren't just fixing houses. We were rebuilding trust. We were becoming a community again, not out of convenience, but out of choice. As the summer stretched on, reporters drifted away, their cameras packed up, their headlines shifting to newer stories. But we stayed. Linda worked tirelessly, hosting open meetings on the new HOA reforms. Tom organized community cleanup days, turning the neglected green spaces into parks. Sarah, Tom's daughter, helped set up a public website where every HOA decision would be posted for all to see. The old bitterness, the suspicion, the fear, it faded with each new flower bed planted, each potluck shared, each fence mended. I spent my afternoons tending the garden, just as Sarah would have wanted. Sometimes little Annie from 2 doors down would come by, dragging a tattered book, asking me to read to her beneath the shade of the roses. The bench we rebuilt in Sarah's honor became a gathering place. Engraved into the new plaque were the words she loved most. "Where love is planted, hope will always bloom." And it did, everywhere. We were not the same community we had been before Barbara's rise. We were wiser now, stronger, bound by something more powerful than fear. We had learned, through hardship and betrayal, that no force, not greed, not fraud, not even the threat of losing everything, could take away what truly mattered. Home, family, honor, each other. As the sun dipped low and the roses caught the evening light, I sat on Sarah's bench, a quiet smile on my face. This battle had started over a rose garden, but in the end, it had bloomed into something far greater, a promise that no matter who came knocking, no matter what storms might one day roll down our quiet street again, we would stand together, and we would never, ever be uprooted again. In the end, this fight was never just about roses or property deeds or even justice. It was about something deeper, something no fraudster, no corrupt official, no scheming neighbor could ever truly touch. It was about the roots we plant when we build a life, the unseen ties that grow between neighbors who share cups of sugar and late-night worries, the invisible threads stitched across backyard fences, knitted through handshakes at block parties, woven into the walls of homes where birthdays are celebrated and goodbyes are mourned. Barbara Wilson thought that by seizing houses, she could seize history. She thought that with one forged signature, she could erase decades of love, labor, and memory. She was wrong. You cannot bulldoze a promise kept. You cannot falsify trust. You cannot sell off the invisible bonds that hold a true community together. When faced with betrayal, we didn't retreat. We remembered who we were. We dug deeper, we stood taller, and we fought back, not with violence, not with cruelty, but with truth, unity, and the stubborn belief that home is something sacred. In the end, it wasn't a governor's title or a courtroom verdict that defeated Barbara. It was a garden, a community, a simple refusal to let wrongness take root where roses were meant to bloom. And maybe that's the final lesson for all of us. Protect what you love. Tend the soil of your life with care. Because when the storms come, and they always do, it's the roots you planted long ago that will hold you steady.